The wind cut through the city streets like a knife that November evening. Daniel Rivera stood at the bus stop on Fifth Avenue, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, trying to keep warm. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees in just 2 hours, and nobody had been prepared for it. Least of all him. He'd left his apartment that morning in just a light sweater, thinking the weather forecast was reliable. It wasn't. Now he was standing there at 7:30 in the evening, exhausted from a job interview that had gone nowhere, watching his breath form little clouds in the freezing air. The interview had been his third one that week. A small marketing agency downtown, the kind of place that wanted 5 years of experience but could only pay entry-level wages. Daniel had smiled through the whole thing, nodded at the right moments, pretended he was thrilled at the opportunity. But he could tell halfway through that they'd already made up their minds. They were just going through the motions. He checked his phone. The bus tracker said 12 minutes. He sighed and leaned against the shelter wall, which somehow felt even colder than standing in the open air. That's when he noticed her. She was standing about 10 feet away, closer to the curb, wearing what looked like an expensive navy blue dress and heels that were completely wrong for the weather. No coat, no scarf, nothing. Just that dress and a leather handbag clutched against her chest. She was shivering so badly he could see it from where he stood. Daniel looked away at first. It was a city, after all. You learned not to stare. You learned to mind your own business. But something about the way she was standing there, her shoulders hunched up almost to her ears, her arms wrapped around herself, made it impossible to ignore. She looked like she was about to cry. He glanced down at his jacket. It was old, maybe 4 years now, with a small coffee stain on the left sleeve that never quite came out. But it was warm. It was lined with fleece, and right now it was keeping him from freezing. Daniel looked at the woman again. She'd pulled out her phone and was tapping at the screen frantically. Then she made a frustrated sound and shoved it back in her purse. Dead battery, probably. He knew he should just mind his own business. He had a job fair tomorrow morning across town, and he needed to look presentable. The jacket was part of his only decent interview outfit. Without it, he'd be showing up in just a button-down shirt, which would make him look unprepared at best, desperate at worst. But she was really shivering. Daniel walked over before he could talk himself out of it. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice gentle so he wouldn't startle her. "You look freezing." The woman turned to look at him, and he was struck by how tired she looked. Not just physically tired, but the kind of exhausted that came from carrying too much weight for too long. She had to be in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a bun that was starting to come loose. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but her teeth were chattering. "You're not fine," Daniel said. He was already unzipping his jacket. "Here, take this." "No, I couldn't possibly." "Please," he interrupted, holding it out to her. "It's really cold and I've got a sweater on underneath. You've just got that dress." She stared at the jacket like it was some kind of puzzle she couldn't figure out. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She took it slowly, almost reluctantly, and slipped it on. It was too big for her, but she pulled it tight around herself immediately, and Daniel saw her whole body relax just a little bit. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "I can't tell you how much I needed this." "Rough day?" Daniel asked, shoving his hands back in his pockets. She laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that was almost a sob. "You could say that. My car broke down about 2 miles from here. I walked all the way in these stupid heels. Then my phone died right as I was trying to call a ride. And I just realized I left my coat in the car because I was so flustered trying to get everything out before the tow truck came." "That's brutal," Daniel said. "What makes it worse is that I spent the entire day in back-to-back meetings with people trying to impress me with their credentials and their connections and their fancy degrees," she continued, the words spilling out like she'd been holding them in for hours. "Everyone performing, everyone putting on a show, and then I end up stranded, and a complete stranger offers me his jacket without even thinking about it." Daniel shrugged. "It's just a jacket. You needed it more than me." She looked at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. "What's your name?" "Daniel." "Daniel Rivera." "I'm Elena," she said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm despite the cold. They stood there in silence for a minute, watching the occasional car drive past. Daniel noticed that she kept glancing at him like she was trying to figure something out. "Do you live around here?" she asked finally. "About 30 minutes by bus." I was coming back from a job interview. How'd it go? Daniel made a face. Not great. They want someone with more experience, which is what everyone wants, but nobody wants to give you the experience in the first place. Elena nodded slowly. What kind of work do you do? Graphic design. Freelance mostly, which is just a nice way of saying I pick up whatever work I can find. I've been trying to land something more stable, but it's tough out there. It is tough, Elena agreed. Too many companies looking for perfect candidates instead of good people they can develop. A black SUV pulled up to the curb, and Elena's phone, which apparently wasn't completely dead, buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out and checked it, then looked at Daniel. That's my ride, she said, but I can't take your jacket. You need it. Keep it for now, Daniel said. You've got to get home somehow. I'll survive. No, really. I'll tell you what, Daniel interrupted. I'm a freelance designer, which means I have business cards that I barely ever get to use. He pulled out his wallet and fished out one of the simple cards he'd printed at the library. Take one. Get home, get warm, and when you're ready, you can mail the jacket back or something. Elena took the card and studied it. You're serious? I'm serious. Just don't ghost me with my favorite jacket, okay? She smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her all evening. I promise I won't ghost you. She walked to the SUV, and Daniel noticed she was still moving carefully in those heels. Before she got in, she turned back. Daniel? Yeah? Thank you. Really? You have no idea how much I needed this tonight. Not just the jacket. The reminder that decent people still exist. Then she was gone, the SUV pulling away into traffic. Daniel stood there alone at the bus stop, considerably colder now but feeling strangely good about the whole thing. The bus tracker said 7 minutes now. He pulled his sweater down as far as it would go and tried not to think about how cold tomorrow's job fair was going to be without that jacket. The sweater would have to do. Maybe he could stop at the thrift store on the way if they opened early enough. It didn't matter. The look of relief on that woman's face when she'd put on the jacket had been worth it. He just hoped she'd actually return it. It really was his only decent jacket. The bus arrived 6 minutes later, and Daniel climbed on, found a seat near the back, and watched the city slide past the window. He thought about Elena, probably getting home now, warming up, maybe having some hot tea or coffee. He thought about the interview tomorrow, the job fair, the freelance projects he was juggling, the rent that was due in 2 weeks, same worries as always. But for some reason, tonight they didn't feel quite as heavy. Sometimes doing something good for someone else had a way of making your own problems seem a little bit smaller, even if just for a moment. Even if just for one cold November night at a bus stop on 5th Avenue. 3 days passed, and Daniel had almost convinced himself that the jacket was gone for good. It wasn't that he was bitter about it. He'd made his choice that night at the bus stop, and he'd do it again. But the practical part of his brain, the part that had to balance his bank account and count every dollar, kept reminding him that he'd given away a $100 jacket to a complete stranger. The job fair had been cold. He'd worn 2 sweaters layered over his button-down shirt, which made him look bulky and awkward in all his conversations. No offers, just a few business cards and vague promises to keep in touch. Now it was Monday afternoon, and he was sitting at his kitchen table, which doubled as his desk, his dining table, and his workstation, trying to finish a logo design for a client who kept changing his mind about what he wanted. When his phone rang with an unknown number, he almost didn't answer. Usually those were spam calls or recruiters for jobs that didn't actually exist, but something made him pick up. Hello? Is this Daniel Rivera? The voice was professional, crisp, female, speaking. Mr. Rivera, my name is Christine Park. I'm calling on behalf of Ms. Vasquez. She'd like to invite you to visit our offices tomorrow to return something that belongs to you. Daniel's brain took a second to catch up.
I'm sorry, who?
Ms. Elena Vasquez. You met her last Thursday evening? Oh, right. Yeah, the jacket. Yes, the jacket, Christine said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Ms. Vasquez would like to return it personally and thank you properly. Would you be available tomorrow afternoon around 2? Daniel pulled up his calendar on his laptop. He had a client call at 11, but nothing after that. Sure, I can do 2. Where's the office? Meridian Tower, downtown. 42nd Flu. When you arrive, just let security know you're here to see Ms. Vasquez and they'll direct you. Meridian Tower? Daniel repeated. Something about that name tickled at the back of his memory. What kind of office is this? There was a pause. Ms. Vasquez will explain everything when you arrive. I'll send you a confirmation email with all the details. Does the email on your business card still work? Yeah, that's good. Excellent. We'll see you tomorrow at 2, Mr. Rivera. She hung up before he could ask any more questions. Daniel sat there staring at his phone, then immediately Googled Meridian Tower. The search results made his stomach drop. Meridian Tower was home to Meridian Innovations, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the city. He'd read about them in business articles, seen their CEO featured in magazines at the dentist's office. They developed software for sustainable urban planning, whatever that meant, and they were worth something like $500 million. He Googled Elena Vasquez. The first result was her Wikipedia page. Elena Vasquez. Age 35. Founder and CEO of Meridian Innovations. Featured on Forbes' 30 Under 30 list 5 years ago. Graduated from Stanford. Raised $200 million in venture capital funding. Currently overseeing expansion into 15 new cities. Daniel looked at the photos. Same woman. Same dark hair. Same tired eyes. Though in these professional shots she was smiling confidently, wearing power suits instead of shivering in a blue dress at a bus stop. Oh no, Daniel said out loud to his empty apartment. Oh no, he'd given his jacket to a CEO. An actual CEO of a major company, and he'd had no idea. Which meant she'd been standing there freezing, probably having the worst day of her life. And he'd just treated her like a normal person because he'd thought she was a normal person. Daniel put his head in his hands. What did she want? Why was he being summoned to her office? Was this some kind of weird corporate thing where she was going to make a big deal out of a simple gesture? He spent the rest of the evening alternating between anxiety and curiosity, and he barely slept that night. The next day, Daniel showed up at Meridian Tower at exactly 1:55. He'd worn his one good suit, the same one he'd worn to every interview for the past month. He'd even ironed it, which was something he rarely bothered with for client meetings. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place that made you feel small the moment you walked in. The lobby had marble floors and a waterfall wall and security guards who looked like they took their jobs very seriously. I'm here to see Elena Vasquez, Daniel told the guard at the desk, trying to sound confident. I have a 2 o'clock appointment. The guard checked his computer, then nodded. Mr. Rivera, yes, you're expected. Take the elevator to the 42nd floor. Someone will meet you there. The elevator ride felt like it took forever. Daniel watched the numbers climb, his reflection staring back at him from the polished steel doors. What was he doing here? This was insane. The doors opened and he stepped out into a reception area that looked like something from a design magazine. Everything was white and chrome and expensive looking. A woman in a perfectly tailored suit approached him immediately. Mr. Rivera, I'm Christine Park. We spoke on the phone. Please follow me. She led him down a hallway lined with windows that overlooked the entire city. Daniel could see for miles. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. They stopped at a large wooden door and Christine knocked once before opening it. Ms. Vasquez, Mr. Rivera is here. Thank you, Christine. Send him in. Daniel stepped into an office that was bigger than his entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk that looked like it cost more than his car. Bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes and industry awards, and there, standing by the window, was Elena. She looked different than she had at the bus stop. Put together, powerful. She was wearing a gray suit and her hair was perfect, and she looked every inch the successful CEO from those magazine photos. But when she smiled, it was the same warm smile from that night. Daniel, she said, walking over to shake his hand. Thank you so much for coming. I didn't realize who you were, Daniel said, because apparently his brain had decided honesty was the best strategy when he was completely out of his depth. Elena laughed. I know. That's exactly why I wanted to see you again. She gestured to a sitting area by the windows, 2 leather chairs and a coffee table. Daniel's jacket was folded neatly on the table and next to it was a white envelope. They sat down and Elena picked up the jacket. First things first, your jacket freshly dry cleaned. I noticed the coffee stain was still there, so I took the liberty of having them treat it. It should be gone now. Daniel took the jacket, running his hand over the sleeve. Sure enough, the stain had disappeared. You didn't have to do that, I wanted to. And there's something else. She picked up the envelope and handed it to him. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside was a check for $500. He stared at it, then looked up at her. "I can't accept this, and it's not payment for the jacket," Elena said quickly. "Let me explain. That night at the bus stop, that was one of the worst days I've had in a long time. I spent 8 hours interviewing candidates for an executive assistant position. 8 hours of people telling me what they thought I wanted to hear. Every single one of them had researched me, knew exactly who I was, and they all performed perfectly. Perfect answers, perfect resumes, perfect everything." She leaned back in her chair. "But none of them were genuine. None of them saw me as a person, just as a position to impress. Then my car breaks down. I'm stranded, freezing, and a complete stranger offers me his jacket without a second thought. No agenda, no performance, just basic human kindness." Daniel didn't know what to say. "That check isn't payment," Elena continued. "It's an investment. In character. In the kind of person who does the right thing even when there's nothing in it for them. Because people like you are rare, Daniel, and I think you deserve recognition for that. I just gave you a jacket," Daniel said quietly. "You gave a shivering woman your jacket without knowing who she was or whether you'd ever get it back. You had a job fair the next day and you did it anyway. Christine told me she could hear you were nervous when she called you, but you showed up. Do you know why I noticed all of that?" Daniel shook his head. "Because I built my entire company on the idea that character matters more than credentials. That good people who care about others will build better things than brilliant people who only care about themselves. And in one simple gesture, you reminded me why I started this company in the first place." She stood up and walked to her desk, picking up a folder. "Which brings me to the real reason I asked you here. I have a proposal for you." Daniel's heart was pounding. "A proposal?" "I want to create a new position at Meridian. Director of Community Initiatives. Someone who can help us build programs that actually connect our technology with the people who need it most. Someone who understands what it's like to struggle, to need help, to be on the outside looking in." She handed him the folder. "I want that someone to be you." Daniel opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside was a job description, a salary figure that made his eyes water, and a benefits package that included health insurance, retirement matching, and stock options. "You're offering me a job?" he managed to say. "I'm offering you an opportunity," Elena corrected. "I know you're a graphic designer, not a corporate executive. I know you don't have an MBA or 5 years of experience in community outreach, but you have something more important. You have empathy. You have integrity, and I believe you can learn everything else." Daniel looked at the salary figure again. It was 3 times what he made freelancing. 3 times, why me? He asked. "You don't know anything about me." "I know the most important thing about you," Elena said. "I know that when you saw someone in need, you helped them without hesitation. And I know that if I can build a team of people who think like that, we can do incredible things." She sat back down across from him. "I'm not asking you to decide right now. Take the folder home. Think about it. Talk to whoever you need to talk to. But I want you to know that this offer is genuine, and I believe you could do amazing work here." Daniel looked down at the folder in his hands, then at the check, then at his jacket with its missing coffee stain. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Anything. That night at the bus stop, you said you'd spent all day with people trying to impress you. Was this some kind of test?" Elena's expression softened. "No, Daniel. That night was real. My car really broke down. I really was stranded and freezing. And you really did help me without any ulterior motive. That's the whole point. If I'd sent an assistant to some bus stop to stage a scenario, it would have been meaningless. What made your gesture matter was that it was real." She stood up and extended her hand. "Think about my offer. But regardless of what you decide, thank you again for that night. You'll never know how much it meant to me." Daniel shook her hand, gathered up his jacket and the folder, and somehow made it back to the elevator without his legs giving out. As the doors closed and he started the descent back to ground level, back to reality, he realized his hands were still shaking. A job. A real job. With benefits and stability and a salary that would change everything. All because he'd given his jacket to a stranger at a bus stop. He pulled out his phone and called the one person he knew would understand. "Mom?" he said when she answered. "You're not going to believe what just happened." Daniel spent the entire night staring at the job offer folder. He'd spread everything out on his kitchen table after calling his mom. who'd spent 40 minutes crying happy tears over the phone. His younger sister had called right after. Then his best friend Luis, and by 10 o'clock he'd told the story so many times he was starting to feel like he was living in some kind of alternate reality, because things like this didn't happen to people like him. He'd grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment with his mom and sister after his dad left when he was 9. He'd gone to community college because it was all they could afford. He'd taught himself graphic design through YouTube videos and library books because actual classes were too expensive. Every single thing he had, he'd worked for, scraped together, earned the hard way, and now someone was offering him a 6-figure salary and stock options because he'd been kind to a stranger. It felt wrong somehow. Too easy. Like there had to be a catch. At 2 in the morning, he was still awake, reading the job description for the 100th time. Director of Community Initiatives. The role didn't exist yet. Elena wanted to build it around him, around his perspective, around his ideas. But what did he know about running corporate community programs? He'd never managed a team. He'd never written a strategic plan or presented to a board of directors. He'd barely managed to keep his freelance business afloat. What if he took the job and failed? What if Elena realized she'd made a mistake? What if he proved that nice guys really do finish last? He finally fell asleep around 4, the folder still open beside him. The next morning, Daniel called the number Christine had included in the folder. Christine Park speaking. Hi, this is Daniel Rivera. I need a little more time to think about the offer. Is that okay? Of course, Christine said warmly. Ms. Vasquez said to tell you there's no pressure. Take whatever time you need. Would a week be sufficient? Yes, a week would be great. Perfect. I'll note that in her calendar. And Daniel? For what it's worth, we're all hoping you say yes. That made him feel better and worse at the same time. He spent the next 3 days doing research. He looked up everything he could find about Meridian Innovations, their projects, their values, their community involvement or lack thereof. He read employee reviews on job sites. He watched every interview Elena had ever given. What he found surprised him. Meridian was successful, sure, but they weren't perfect. Some reviews complained about long hours. Others mentioned that the company had grown so fast that they'd lost touch with their original mission. Several people said the company felt too corporate now, too focused on profits and investors. But the overwhelming theme was that people believed in Elena. They thought she was brilliant and fair and genuinely cared about making a difference. They just wished the company could be more connected to actual communities, instead of just developing software for city planners. On the 4th day, Daniel did something that surprised himself. He went to a coffee shop in a neighborhood that Meridian had supposedly helped with one of their urban planning projects. He talked to people, asked them about changes in the area, whether they felt like the improvements had helped them or just made rent go up. The answers were mixed. Some people loved the new bike lanes and green spaces. Others felt like they were being pushed out, like the neighborhood was being redesigned for people with money instead of the people who'd lived there for decades. It gave Daniel an idea. On the 5th day, he opened his laptop and started writing. Not a formal business proposal. He didn't know how to write those anyway, but just his thoughts. His perspective. Ideas about what community initiatives could look like if they were designed by someone who'd actually struggled, who'd actually needed help. What if instead of just developing software, Meridian created actual spaces where people could learn to use that software? What if they hired local residents as community liaisons instead of just bringing in consultants? What if they measured success not by how many projects they completed, but by how many lives they actually improved? He wrote for 6 hours straight. When he finally stopped, he had 12 pages of ideas that were probably naive and definitely inexperienced but felt true. On the 6th day, his mom came over. She brought his favorite meal, her homemade chicken tamales, and they sat at his kitchen table while he told her everything he'd been thinking. "I'm scared, Mom," he admitted. "What if I'm not good enough?" His mother, who'd worked 2 jobs for 15 years to keep them afloat, who'd never finished high school but had made sure both her kids graduated college, looked at him with those fierce eyes that had gotten them through every hard time. "Mijo, do you remember when you were 12 and you wanted to join the school art club, but you said you weren't good enough because you didn't have fancy supplies like the other kids?" Daniel nodded. "And I told you that art wasn't about expensive brushes. It was about seeing the world differently and being brave enough to show people what you see. You joined that club with your discount store markers and you won the school art show. Remember? I remember. This is the same thing. This woman isn't hiring you because you have a fancy degree or because you know how to talk corporate talk. She's hiring you because you see people, because you care. That's not something you can learn in business school, Daniel. That's something you either have or you don't, and you have it. She reached across the table and took his hand. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have moments where you feel lost, but you're going to figure it out because that's what you do. That's what we do. We figure it out. Daniel felt his throat get tight. What if I let her down? What if you don't? What if you're exactly what that company needs? What if you take this chance and you help people who are just like we were, struggling and needing someone to believe in them? That night, Daniel barely slept again, but this time it wasn't fear keeping him awake. It was possibility. On the 7th day, he called Christine. I'd like to accept the position, he said, but I have some conditions. There was a pause. Conditions? I wrote up some ideas about how I see this role working. I know I don't have experience, but I have perspective. And if Ms. Vasquez really wants me for this position, then she should want my perspective too. Not just a yes man who's grateful for the opportunity. Another pause. Then Christine laughed. Hold on. Let me patch you through to her directly. A click and then Elena's voice. Daniel, Christine says you have conditions. I'm intrigued. I have ideas, Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady, about what community initiatives could actually mean. Not just charity projects that make the company look good, but real programs that give people opportunities. Like I needed, like a lot of people need. I'm listening. I wrote it all down. 12 pages. It's probably too much and definitely not professional, but if you want me, you're getting all of me. My ideas, my perspective, my probably too honest opinions about how companies usually mess this stuff up. There was silence on the other end, and Daniel's heart sank. He'd overplayed his hand. He'd been too bold. This was why he'd never succeed in corporate. Send it to me, Elena said. Today, and come in tomorrow morning at 9. Not to the fancy office. To the conference room on the 35th floor. Bring more copies of whatever you wrote because I'm inviting the entire leadership team to hear your pitch. My pitch? Daniel's voice cracked. You wanted to do this your way, right? To bring your full perspective? Well, here's your chance. Show us what community initiatives could look like through your eyes. Convince us. And if you can convince a room full of skeptical executives who've never struggled a day in their lives, then you'll prove you're ready for this job. Daniel's hands were shaking. And if I can't convince them? Then I guess we'll find out if I hired you for your ideas or just because I felt guilty about a jacket, Elena said. But he could hear the smile in her voice. 9 a.m., Daniel. Don't be late, she hung up. Daniel looked at his laptop. At the 12 pages of ideas that had been theoretical just 5 minutes ago and were now about to become very, very real. He had less than 24 hours to turn his midnight thoughts into something professional enough to present to a room full of executives. Luis came over that evening with coffee and moral support. Together, they spent the night reformatting Daniel's ideas into something that looked like an actual presentation. Luis, who worked in sales and knew about PowerPoint, helped him create slides that didn't look like they were made by someone who'd learned design from YouTube videos. You've got something here, Luis said around midnight, reviewing the slides. This stuff about creating co-working spaces in underserved neighborhoods, providing free resources and mentorship. That's solid, man. That's actually innovative. You think they'll buy it? Daniel asked. I think they'd be stupid not to. But that's not really the question, is it? The question is whether you believe in it enough to fight for it. Daniel looked at his presentation, at his ideas laid out in neat bullet points and carefully chosen fonts. I believe in it. I'm just not sure I believe in me. Then fake it tomorrow, Luis said. Fake it until you convince yourself. At 8:45 the next morning, Daniel stood outside the Mary Diane Tower conference room wearing his one good suit and carrying 8 printed copies of his presentation. His hands were sweating so badly he was worried he'd smudge the pages. Christine met him at the door. They're ready for you. Ms. Vasquez is already inside along with the VP of Operations, the CFO, the head of development, and 3 board members. Board members? Daniel's voice went up an octave. I thought this was just leadership. Board members are leadership, Christine said gently. You'll be fine. Just breathe and be yourself. That's why you're here. She opened the door. The conference room was enormous, with a table that could seat 20 people. 7 people were already seated, all of them looking professional and expensive and slightly skeptical. Elena sat at the head of the table. She nodded at Daniel and gestured to the empty chair across from her. Daniel, thank you for coming. Everyone, this is Daniel Rivera. He's here to share his vision for our Community Initiatives program. A man in his 50s with silver hair and an expensive watch looked Daniel up and down. The jacket guy, Elena confirmed. Who has some ideas I think we should hear? Daniel, the floor is yours. Daniel walked to the front of the room on legs that felt like rubber. He handed out the copies of his presentation, took a deep breath and began. 3 weeks ago, I was at a bus stop, coming home from another failed job interview, trying to figure out how I was going to make rent. Today I'm standing in front of all of you, and honestly, I still can't quite believe this is real. Someone shifted in their seat. Elena nodded encouragingly. I'm not a businessman, Daniel continued. I don't have an MBA. I learned design from library books because I couldn't afford classes. But that's exactly why I think I can help Meridian actually connect with communities, instead of just developing tools for them. He pulled up his first slide. Because I know what it's like to need help, to need opportunity, to need someone to believe in you. And I know that most corporate community programs fail because they're designed by people who've never actually needed them. The silver-haired man leaned forward. That's a bold claim. It's a true claim, Daniel said, his confidence growing. Look at the data on corporate community initiatives. Most of them focus on short-term charity projects that make good press but don't create lasting change. They give people a meal or a coat, but they don't give them tools to build better lives. He advanced to his next slide, showing the neighborhood research he'd done. I spent time in the Riverside district, where Meridian helped redesign the urban infrastructure 2 years ago. It's beautiful. The parks are great, but residents told me they feel like the improvements were made for future residents, not them. Their rent went up 30% and nobody asked them what they actually needed. The room was silent. Everyone was listening. So here's what I'm proposing, Daniel said, advancing to his ideas. Not charity, not handouts, opportunity. Real, sustainable opportunity. For the next 30 minutes, Daniel laid out his vision. Co-working spaces in low-income neighborhoods with free access to Meridian software and training. Mentorship programs pairing Meridian employees with local students. Job training initiatives that actually led to job offers, not just certificates. Community design councils where residents had actual input on projects that affected their neighborhoods. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then Elena smiled. Questions? The silver-haired man spoke first. This sounds expensive. It is expensive, Daniel agreed. But doing nothing costs more. How much did Meridian spend on PR last year trying to convince people you care about communities? This wouldn't be PR. This would be actual impact. A woman with sharp eyes and sharper suit asked, How do you know any of this would work? Where's your evidence? I don't have evidence yet, Daniel admitted. But I can tell you this. I can tell you what worked for me. The library that gave me free computer access. The professor who spent extra time teaching me even though I wasn't technically in his class. The people who saw potential in me instead of just seeing my circumstances. That's what I want to build. A system that doesn't just help people survive but helps them thrive. Elena stood up. I think we've heard enough. Daniel, can you wait outside for a few minutes? His heart sank. This was it. They were going to tell him he was too inexperienced, too naive, too much of a risk. He gathered his materials and walked out, Christine closing the door behind him. He sat in the hallway for what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes. Finally, the door opened. Elena stepped out and Daniel couldn't read her expression. Well, she said, I have good news and bad news. Daniel's stomach dropped. Okay. The good news is you've got the job. Everyone in that room agreed you're exactly what we need. Your passion, your perspective, your honesty. And the bad news? Elena's expression broke into a huge smile. The bad news is you start Monday and you've got 3 months to prove that your ideas can work. No pressure. Daniel felt his legs go weak. I got it? I actually got it? You got it, Elena confirmed. Welcome to Meridian, Daniel. I think you're going to change a lot of lives here. She extended her hand, and when Daniel shook it, he realized something had fundamentally shifted. He'd walked into this building a week Ago as a struggling freelancer who'd given away his jacket. He was walking out as the director of community initiatives for a $500 million company. And the scariest part? He was ready to prove he deserved it. The first day was overwhelming. Daniel showed up at 8:30 on Monday morning, half convinced someone was going to tell him there'd been a mistake, that they'd meant to hire someone else, someone qualified. Instead, Christine met him in the lobby with a welcome packet, an employee badge, and a smile that suggested she knew exactly how terrified he was. "Your office is on the 36th floor," she said, leading him to the elevator. "Ms. Vasquez thought you'd want to be close to the community development team but still have your own space to think." "I have an office?" Daniel's voice cracked slightly. "You're a director now," Christine reminded him. "Directors get offices." The office was small by Meridian standards but huge by Daniel's standards. It had a window overlooking the city, a desk that wasn't a kitchen table, and a bookshelf that was currently empty but full of possibility. There was also a box sitting on the desk with a note. Daniel picked up the note. "Elena's handwriting for your first project. Build something that matters." Inside the box was his jacket, the one he'd given her at the bus stop, but it had been transformed. Someone had embroidered the Meridian logo on the chest, small and subtle. On the inside lining, there was another embroidered message: "Remember why you started." Daniel hung the jacket on the back of his door and got to work. The first 3 months were brutal. Not because the work was impossible, but because Daniel was learning everything on the fly. How to write proper budget proposals, how to present to stakeholders who spoke in acronyms he didn't understand, how to navigate corporate politics when he barely knew what corporate culture even was. He made mistakes, lots of them. In his second week, he accidentally scheduled a community feedback session for the same day as a major board meeting, and half his team couldn't attend. In his third week, he submitted a budget request that was missing 2 entire sections because he didn't know those sections were required. In his fourth week, he called a senior VP by the wrong name in an email that went to 200 people. Some executives were patient with him. Others weren't. The silver-haired man from his interview, Daniel learned his name was Richard, and he was the CFO, seemed to take particular pleasure in pointing out Daniel's inexperience in every meeting. "Has anyone reviewed this proposal for basic financial feasibility?" Richard asked during one particularly painful budget meeting, holding up Daniel's plans for the co-working space initiative like it was contaminated. "I did the research," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady. "The numbers are based on similar programs in 3 other cities. Programs run by nonprofits with donor funding," Richard countered. "We're a for-profit company. Have you calculated the opportunity cost, the ROI timeline, the risk assessment?" Daniel hadn't because he didn't fully understand what those terms meant in corporate context. "I can revise the proposal," he said quietly. "Please do, and next time, run it by someone with actual business experience before presenting it to this group." Elena intervened. "Richard, Daniel is learning. We all were new once." "Not all of us were new at the director level," Richard muttered. After the meeting, Daniel sat in his office staring at his proposal, covered in red marks from Richard's critique. He felt like a fraud, like everyone could see that he didn't belong here. There was a knock on his door. Elena walked in and sat in the chair across from his desk. "Rough meeting," she said. "I'm in over my head," Daniel admitted. "I don't know what I'm doing. Every meeting I feel like I'm speaking a different language than everyone else." "You are speaking a different language," Elena said. "That's the point. Richard speaks the language of spreadsheets and risk mitigation. You speak the language of impact and human connection. This company needs both." "But if I can't even write a proper budget proposal..." "So learn," Elena interrupted. "I'm pairing you with Priya from finance. She's going to teach you how to translate your ideas into the language Richard understands. But don't let that process make you lose your language. Don't let this place sand down your edges until you're just another corporate director saying the right words without meaning them." She stood up. "You're going to feel lost sometimes. That's growth. The question isn't whether you make mistakes. It's whether you learn from them fast enough to keep moving forward." Daniel took her advice. He spent his lunch breaks with Priya, learning financial modeling. He stayed late studying past proposals, figuring out the format and structure. He asked questions constantly, sometimes feeling stupid, but slowly getting less stupid, and gradually, Slowly, things started to click. By month 2, Daniel's proposals were getting approved more often than rejected. By month 3, he'd stopped feeling like everyone was waiting for him to fail, and then he launched his first real project. The Tech Commons initiative started small. One co-working space in the Riverside neighborhood, the same area where Daniel had done his research. The space offered free access to computers, software training, and mentorship from Meridian employees who volunteered their time. Daniel spent weeks planning the launch, working with community leaders to make sure the space met actual needs rather than what he thought the needs were. On opening day, 75 people showed up. There was Anna, a single mother who wanted to learn coding so she could work from home. There was Mr. Chen, a retired teacher who wanted to start a tutoring business but didn't know how to build a website. There were teenagers who needed a quiet place to do homework away from crowded apartments. There were aspiring entrepreneurs who had ideas but no resources. Daniel walked through the space that first day, watching people tentatively approach the computers, watching volunteers patiently explaining software, watching the exact moment when someone's eyes lit up because they understood something new. This was why he'd taken the job, not for the salary or the office or the title. For the chance to be for other people what others had been for him. The Tech Commons got written up in the local paper. Then a business blog picked up the story. Then the mayor mentioned it in a speech about public-private partnerships. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about Meridian's community initiatives. By month 4, Daniel was getting requests from other neighborhoods. By month 5, companies in other cities were calling to ask how Meridian's program worked. By month 6, the first success stories started coming in. Anna finished a coding boot camp and got hired as a junior developer. Mr. Chen's tutoring business had 20 regular students. One of the teenagers won a scholarship to a tech college because of a portfolio project she'd completed at the Commons. Richard stopped questioning Daniel's proposals quite so aggressively, but success brought new challenges. With more attention came more demand. More neighborhoods wanted Commons locations. More volunteers wanted to participate. More organizations wanted to partner with Meridian. Daniel's team grew from just him to 3 people, then 6, then 10. Managing people was harder than Daniel expected. He'd never been anyone's boss before, and suddenly he was responsible for an entire team's work, their professional development, their conflicts and challenges. One of his early hires, a young woman named Keisha who'd been brilliant in her interview, turned out to be consistently late and missed deadlines. Daniel avoided addressing it for weeks, not wanting to be a harsh boss, until the problem started affecting the whole team, Elena noticed. "You need to have the conversation. What if she quits?" Daniel asked. "She's talented when she shows up. Then she quits and you hire someone who's talented and reliable. Being kind doesn't mean avoiding difficult conversations. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is be honest about what's not working." Daniel had the conversation. It was uncomfortable. Keisha cried. He nearly cried, but they worked out a performance plan. She got better. Or rather, she showed up consistently, which let her talent actually matter. The experience taught Daniel that leadership wasn't just about having good ideas. It was about execution, accountability, and making hard decisions even when they felt terrible. By month 9, the Tech Commons had expanded to 4 locations across the city. Daniel had hired a full team of coordinators, trainers, and community liaisons. They'd served over 2,000 people, and Daniel had become someone he barely recognized. He wore suits without thinking about it now. He could read a financial statement. He knew what ROI and stakeholder engagement and vertical integration meant. He could code switch between his natural way of speaking and corporate language depending on the audience. Sometimes he worried he was losing himself, becoming just another executive who'd forgotten where he came from. Then he'd go visit one of the Commons locations, and someone would thank him for creating a space that changed their life. And he'd remember. At the 10-month mark, Elena called him into her office. "Sit down," she said, and her tone was serious enough that Daniel's stomach dropped. Had he messed up? Was she disappointed? Had Richard finally convinced everyone that Daniel was a mistake? "I need to talk to you about something important," Elena continued. "The board has been reviewing the Community Initiatives program." Daniel braced himself. "They want to make it a flagship part of Meridian's identity, not a side project, but a core part of what we do." which means expanding your team, your budget, and your scope. Daniel blinked. That's good news. It's very good news. But it also means more responsibility, more pressure, more scrutiny. You'd be reporting directly to the C-suite. Your decisions would affect the entire company's reputation. Can I do it? Daniel asked. Honestly? Elena smiled. 10 months ago, I would have said maybe. Today, I'd say yes without hesitation. You've grown more in 10 months than some directors grow in 5 years. You've made mistakes, but you've learned from every single one. And most importantly, you haven't lost sight of why you're here. She pulled out a document. This is a new contract. Bigger role, bigger salary, bigger opportunity. But before you sign it, I need you to be sure this is what you want. Because once you're at this level, the stakes get higher, the failures get more visible, the pressure gets more intense, and Daniel thought about the last 10 months. The stress, the mistakes, the moments when he'd wanted to quit. But he also thought about Anna and Mr. Chen and all the others whose lives had changed. He thought about the kid he'd been, sitting in a library with discount store markers, hoping someone would give him a chance. I'm sure, he said. Elena handed him a pen. As Daniel signed the contract, he looked at the jacket hanging on his door. The jacket he'd given to a stranger at a bus stop without knowing it would change everything. You know what's funny? He said. What? A year ago I was worried about how I'd pay rent. Today I'm signing a contract that makes me one of the highest paid people I personally know. And the scariest part is that it all feels normal now. Elena nodded. That's not funny. That's dangerous. What do you mean? I mean, don't get comfortable. Don't let success make you forget what it was like to struggle. The moment you lose that empathy, the moment you stop seeing people the way you saw me at that bus stop, as humans first, everything else second, that's when you lose what makes you valuable. She stood up and extended her hand. Congratulations, Daniel. You've earned this. Now don't screw it up. He shook her hand, took his new contract, and went back to his office. That night, Daniel did something he hadn't done in months. He took the bus home instead of calling a rideshare. He sat at the same stop where he'd met Elena, watching people come and go. A young guy in a stained jacket, probably coming from a construction job. An older woman with grocery bags counting change for the fare. A teenager with a backpack covered in patches, probably heading to a night shift. He saw them. Really saw them. The way he'd seen Elena that night. And he made himself a promise. No matter how successful he became, no matter how comfortable his life got, he would never stop seeing people. Never stop recognizing struggle. Never stop being willing to give his jacket to someone who needed it more. Because that's who he was. That's who he had to stay.